Hello and welcome back to the Level Up English podcast, the place to be if you want to work on your English listening skills, learn more about English and British English, and hopefully just have fun and learn interesting things in our conversations. And I think this episode will be no different because I'm so excited for this. I'm really excited. We have a fantastic conversation lined up today with Bree Aesie. Bree Aesie is a fellow podcaster. She hosts an English podcast called Into the Story, which uses Bree's passion for storytelling to help English learners reach their goals and improve their English. She's originally from Canada, now living in Barcelona, Spain, although we hardly had time to cover that today because we got really deep into a shared interest that we both have. So as I said, Bree's podcast, Into the Story, is all about sharing stories in English. And she's had on some really amazing guests in the past. I should also say, including me. Not that I'm amazing, exactly, but I was also a guest on Bree's podcast. So if you want to check it out, I recommend you do. Perhaps you could start with my episode and then move on to some other episodes. She's also spoken to Luke from Luke's English podcast. That was a really enjoyable story. I loved that one. And there are many more coming up this year as well. My story was very personal. It goes through a difficult time I went through in my early 20s. And we spoke about a lot of really personal things. So there's a few things there that were quite difficult to share. But if you do listen, I hope you enjoy that. In this podcast on Level Up English, I will be swapping positions and I will put Bree in the position of storyteller. So I'm asking her to tell us a story from her meditation experience. Bree went on a 10-day silent retreat in Thailand several years ago. And she talks about her experience on that retreat and why she was interested in going on that as well. We deal in topics such as death and grief, quite serious topics, also connecting with other people, and the benefits of depriving yourself of comfort. If you deprive yourself, it means you don't allow yourself to do something good or something that you need. If you deprive yourself of comfort, you go without comfort. So Bree talks about her very uncomfortable experience, and we talk about some possible lessons that can be taken from that. And then we go into a little talk all about the benefits of learning English through stories. And this is all conveniently backed and supported by science, which is fantastic. And then towards the end, we talk a little bit about what you could do if you're interested in getting started in meditation or mindfulness, or just being present, what really small things you could do to make a positive change in your life. And then I also mentioned something that really drives me crazy. There's one thing in particular that I really hate, that if you do, I will just go crazy. And I talk about that towards the end of the episode, so you have to stick around to hear what that could be. I know you'll like this episode. Bree has a really calming energy and also a very clear and easy to understand accent. So I'm sure you'll enjoy following along, and I hope you do. If you do have any trouble, the membership is always open for you with transcripts and quizzes to help you learn the vocabulary from today's podcast. And that's at levelupenglish.school. If you're interested in that, there's a link in your podcast app if you go down to the description. If not, let's get right into the episode, and I really hope you enjoy it. Welcome everyone to the Level Up English podcast. I'm happy today to be joined by Bree Aesie, and I'm also very happy that you sent me a note before with the phonetic alphabet to how to pronounce your surname, right? So I hope I got it right this time.
You got it perfectly. I've had to deal with this my whole life. Yes, Bree Aesie, like AC/DC or air conditioning.
Very easy. Nice. Well, welcome. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope you're well. Mind sharing a little bit about yourself, like your background, where from, all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Bree, and I am from Canada, from Western Canada. A lot of people are curious about the Canadian accent. I don't know, Michael, can you tell the difference between my accent and like a standard American accent? Do you hear anything?
I think with you, I would have to hear more, but at the moment, no. I can if it's a strong one. Like I heard one the other day where he was saying a boot instead of about, right? And that was a big giveaway for me.
Yeah, that's the classic. So that's more, it tends to be more Eastern Canada. But anyway, so I'm from Canada and I have a background in psychology. So I studied developmental psychology and cognitive psychology. And when I came to Spain about 13 years ago, I started teaching English. And then I opened an English school with my then boyfriend, now husband. And then later down the road, started a podcast, put everything online. And now I am also a parent. I have 2 little boys. And yeah, I'm also a practitioner of yoga and meditation, which I believe we will be speaking about today.
Yeah, I can't wait to get into that. Well, I mean, that's very interesting. So I'm still learning a little bit about you. And it sounds like our journeys are somewhat similar up until the point you said you have kids, which I don't yet. But I imagine your journey was a bit like mine in that maybe you started with one-to-one teaching and then you kind of moved more towards podcasting and things like that. And now I guess you're a bit more branched out in what you do now.
Yeah, so I actually didn't start with one-to-one. I started by teaching in an academy, teaching all levels. So I was teaching small children, teenagers, adults, and then also in company. And I did that just for 1 year. And to be honest with you, there are a lot of similarities between psychology and teaching. I'm sure that you've had that feeling, perhaps, maybe even if you don't know a lot about psychology, but that working with people, teaching communication, you are using a lot of psychology. And so I really enjoyed that first year teaching in the academy. And then immediately after 1 year of experience teaching, I opened a school. And then that was a lot of, managing a school, hiring people, developing a method and curriculum. And then through there started getting interested in actual creating content. So you probably had the same journey where you were teaching and you just didn't have the materials available that you wanted. So you started creating them. And that's basically what I did.
Interesting. And I think you get to a certain point when you realize when you can create content, say on podcasts or social media, you can reach such a larger number of people that way rather than just teaching a classroom of 30 people. So it's quite nice to have a larger impact, isn't it? Hopefully benefiting people.
Yeah, and I remember like putting so much love and care into crafting a lesson, and then I would use it with my 8 students, which was wonderful. But then it was always such a shame because it was done, and I was done with that lesson. Maybe I would use it again the next year or with another class. But I love that we get to create something that gets to be listened to a lot of times, hopefully.
Yeah, really exciting. And I'm also curious, I mean, we'll come back to your podcast a little bit later, of course, but do you think your background kind of relates to the topic of your podcast in any way, like telling stories and kind of analyzing them? Is there any connection there?
Do you mean background in terms of psychology or background in terms of... I think so. Absolutely. I am always interested in looking at the way our brains react to certain stimuli. So how do our brains react when we're listening to a podcast, or how do our brains react when we're looking at a screen? So we can get into it a bit later, but for me, my podcast is helping people gain English fluency by listening to true stories. And there was specifically a study that came out that looks at exactly that. They put people into an MRI listening to a true story podcast, and it's absolutely amazing the way the brain completely lights up when we are interested and listening to a true story. Anyways, I don't want to get all nerdy on you, but it is, for me, very exciting to see that our brains actually react to true stories, in this case, in such a powerful way.
Yeah, amazing. Well, your podcast is called Into the Story, which is a really great resource to learn English through real stories, right? And I somewhat lazily decided to copy your idea for this one. And I thought I could turn the tables on you and maybe ask you to tell a story from your own life. However, one difference I think is that I will keep the kind of unprofessional style of my podcast, that kind of format. So we can ramble, I can butt in every now and then. But
Absolutely.
I know that you're interested in meditation and stuff like that. And I believe you have a story about a meditation retreat that you went on.
Yes, I do.
So would you like to get into that? Where would you like to start with that?
Well, perhaps I can start. I mean, for people now, meditation, I think this day and age, most people know what it is. But I remember hearing about meditation a long time ago when I was like, I don't know, 9 years old. My mom meditated, and she would go into her room and close the door. And in my mind, honestly, I thought for some reason that she was floating. I don't know if I got meditation and levitating confused, but I had this idea that she was like sitting cross-legged, and I would open the door and she would be like floating above the earth. I don't know if anyone else, maybe that's just me. But anyways, fast forward, I am a young adult in my 20s, and I had been practicing. I started doing yoga at university. And then, unfortunately, my dad passed away. So it was a very intense year. He got sick quite quickly, but it was also a very beautiful time, to be honest with you, because when you kind of live alongside someone who is dying, and in his case, someone who is very, accepted it and was very open to having lots of cool conversations, it was a very beautiful time. And there's one specific conversation that we had where he told me, Bree, look, there's life, when you look back on a life lived, it's just like a collection of moments. There's no big prize at the end. It's just all moments that you are present for or not present for. And so after he passed away, in my grief, so in this feeling when you lose someone, being quite sad, I became very kind of obsessed with, okay, I need to be in the moment. I need to live in the moment. But it was very difficult because you want to kind of fast forward through this phase. You want to fast forward and get through difficult feelings. So I started doing a course in mindfulness. So mindfulness is very much related to meditation. It's just the practice of being present and aware of everything. So you could be mindfully eating. So you're like chewing your food. You're not thinking about anything else but the sensation of the food in your mouth and the tastes. And then from there, I decided that I would do a 10-day meditation retreat. So I went online and I found a meditation retreat in Thailand, in Surat Thani, I think it's called. Does that sound like a familiar place to you?
I don't know, but my knowledge of the places here is not great. Okay. So I'm sure you're right.
Okay. So I found this meditation retreat. It looked amazing. And you had to just show up on the last day of each month. There was no way to register. You couldn't call them. You couldn't do anything. So you just had to arrive on the last day of the month, which seemed very mysterious and very cool. And then the meditation retreat would start on the 1st of the following month. So I got on the plane. I arrive at the meditation retreat. And there's just some ladies there. They usher me in. They take me inside. And I was the first one to arrive. And so a meditation retreat in Thailand, anyway, it's not about comfort. It's all about, I don't want to say discomfort, but the point of Buddhism is that you don't have anything that's not necessary. So each room was like a cement block. It was just a cement square with like a cement slab for you to sleep on and a wooden pillow. And we would wake up at 4:30 in the morning and we would go to bed at 9 o'clock at night. And it was all meditation and talks. The monks would speak to us and talk about Buddhist theory and explain different things. The food was amazing, but you always are eating just until you're like 70% full. So you're always just a bit hungry. So does this sound like a comfortable experience, Michael? Do you think
definitely not. No, I haven't quite experienced that myself.
No. So day 1 was great. I was really excited. Day 3, I can't explain it, but my mind just kind of freaked out. Like it got very dark, and really like nothing had changed. I hadn't spoken to anyone because of course this is a silent retreat. But I was just, my mind was like, no way, no, like we can't do this. I can't just be alone in here, not speaking, just looking at my own thoughts for another 7 days. So then the rest of the retreat was very challenging. Like it was wonderful, but it was just very, very difficult. And then the retreat ended, and on the very last day, so the retreat is over, then you have one additional day where you stay at the meditation retreat and you're allowed to speak again.
I bet that's a big relief.
And it's like, it's a sensation that I can't describe. The only thing I could compare it to would be like when you're really, really thirsty and you have like a drink of cold water, and it's like, it's so satisfying. And that's exactly what it felt like. So we started the retreat with 75 people, and slowly, kind of day by day, people would drop out because it just is very challenging. And we ended with about 55. So we lost 20 people. And then the last night, we're sitting in the main meditation hall, and it's probably about 6:30, 7. So in Thailand, the sun is already down, and you can hear the crickets kind of going, and there's no light except for at the front of the room. There's a stage with like a tiny little lamp where each person is going to go up and sit on the stage as the monks had done in all of the days previous. And they're going to explain their story. They're going to explain their experience of being at the retreat. So 55 people doing this. This is quite a long session of people going up and speaking. But it was amazing. It was like listening to each person's experience, because these people were strangers. I didn't know them, but I had kind of seen them through this 10 days together. We've lived through a very intense experience together. And in your mind, you kind of imagine who they are or who they're not, or what their, what their voice sounds like even. And there were stories of people who had, one girl who had almost died. She had fallen off a cliff, and she lay at the bottom of this cliff for I don't know how many hours, but she went through and described how this near-death experience had changed her life. And another guy who had horrible depression and had gone off and tried to become a Tibetan monk, and then kind of explained his journey through this depression and through everything. But there was something about sitting there and listening to these people's stories that was, for me, the most meditative, the most present I had felt, because it just was so easy for me to just watch them and listen, completely engaged in what they're saying. And for me at that point, it became clear that yes, I would continue with my journey of meditation, but for me, stories were the place that I could most comfortably be present and most comfortably be mindful.
That's amazing. You really transported me there while you were describing it. You're a great storyteller, so I can see why that inspired you. I mean, I have been on a few meditation retreats as well, but I've never been on a silent one. We have I've experienced 24 hours of silence on the retreats, which is interesting. But at the end of it, I'm always quite happy to go back to talking again. A big part of the retreats for me have been connecting with other people. Mindful listening is another one, like you were mentioning mindful activities before. Mindful listening is one that I always enjoyed practicing, just listening and not thinking about the next thing you're going to say, which I think can be a useful skill for podcasters too. You're kind of focused and you're not, what should I say next while you're talking?
Yeah, absolutely.
To some extent, right?
Yeah.
But I also spoke to people on the retreat who also went on silent ones like you have, long silent ones. And they said similar things. They said they could imagine people's voices, what they sounded like. They felt, with certain people, they felt like they were friends, even though they hadn't actually spoken, just exchanging looks and things like that. Being with people, they felt very close with them. I imagine, you're nodding, so maybe you had a similar
Yes.
experience.
Absolutely. Part of this retreat, so there's a type of meditation called Vipassana meditation. This was not a Vipassana retreat, but it was very similar, and it's very strict. So you're not even allowed to make eye contact with people.
Wow.
Which is a very, very human thing to do. Most of us, when somebody comes into a room, we look at them and we say, I see you, you're here. I smile, I nod, I do something. We are so social. Even for those of us who consider ourselves introverted or extroverted, it doesn't matter. We are made to live with, around other people. So sometimes you catch yourself looking at someone and acknowledging them. I remember several times going into the place where we would eat, and we would walk into the hall and you're lining up to get food. So to do this without acknowledging someone else is very difficult. You know what I mean? Like just looking down, like just the act of lining up, or as you would say, getting in a queue. How do you say it?
We could say queuing up too, just replace line with queue.
Okay.
Yeah.
Queuing up. You have to look at people. You have to say, okay, yes, you go first, then I go second. We're like organizing ourselves. But anyways, yes, there were definitely people that we would sneak a look, and it felt so nice to have someone acknowledge, yes, I see you, you're here, I smile, I empathize with you. Yeah, it was I'm still in touch with certain people from that retreat that I've never seen since, but I do feel that we share a very special bond for sure.
Okay, well, I really like the idea that there is a lot that goes on between people, between humans, that is not tangible. Like you can't really put it into words, but in terms of the connection between people, that there's something weird about like the energy of two people. Not to get too mystical and magical, but I do feel like sometimes you just get a good vibe, a good sense from someone. So were there any occasions or any people with where you had a sense of who they were, and then when you actually did get a chance to talk to them afterwards, it was correct or quite close? Like, did you have any feeling like that, or were you surprised by how different they were when you actually spoke to them?
Well, actually, I think what stands out most, and I don't know what this says about me or about other people, is that the people that stood out to me most were the ones who were struggling the most. The ones, and that's probably because the people who were struggling the most, who were suffering the most, they couldn't hold it inside. Like you could see the pain. And these were the people who in the end left the retreat and I didn't ever meet. But I have to imagine that they were struggling and that's why they left. And then for me, it's hard to remember. The one that does stand out is actually a girl that I will be interviewing for the podcast this season. And it's the woman who, she was the one who was hiking by herself and fell off a cliff. And it's hard for me to remember what I thought about her before the retreat, because the story that she told on that last sharing night is now, it just kind of eclipses everything else that I thought about her before. But yeah, it's hard for me to answer. I think that most times though, looks can be deceiving and people are not who we think they are.
Yeah, perhaps that's one thing we can learn from this kind of mindfulness, is not to be overly dependent on the senses that we take for granted, and not judging just by looks or something like that. I imagine that could be learnt in some of these cases. The only problem that I have is I've had such like good connections with people on these retreats that I really felt, even just after a week, really felt like we've been friends for many years. These are on mostly talking retreats though. But now, like, anytime I do meditate, you know, as always, thoughts come up and you get distracted by ideas and things in your mind. And very often, because I'm meditating, I think of the time I went on retreats in the past, and then my mind starts thinking about all these people that I met. So now they are distractions in my mind while I'm meditating.
Well, there's always distractions. I think since the time of doing the retreat, there was a time where I found it very difficult to sit down and meditate because my brain was like, no, we're not going back there. So now I don't know if you've heard of the app Headspace.
Yeah, I used it
It's an app,
before.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I use Headspace because I just find it, my brain is like more willing to do a guided meditation than to just sit down. But yeah, I think the thoughts are inevitable, right? Our thoughts always jump into our minds. But at least for your thoughts, they're like nice people that you've met.
Yeah,
at
exactly.
retreats.
They're not like negative ones or any
Yeah.
painful ones. Yeah, it's nice.
Of course. Well, I'll have to send you the contact or the website for this retreat. It's called Swan Mok. And if while you're in Thailand, you feel that you would want to try it, it's a pretty cool experience. And the food
Okay.
is amazing. The food is absolutely unbelievable.
Nice.
It's
Okay,
nice.
that's one of the few comforts you had by the sounds of it.
Yeah. And also they do yoga. A lot of other meditation retreats don't, so that you have a yoga practice every morning. But
Okay,
anyways.
great. Yeah. Let me know. I'll be happy to look into it. I just wanted to ask you one more thing on that topic, because you were, I don't know, maybe this could be a good summary. You were denied a lot of comforts with your wooden pillow and lack of contact with other people, things like that. Do you think there is something that we can learn from not having these comforts? Like, did you come out with any lessons from not having them at the end?
I think that the lesson that I don't know if it's a lesson, but you are just so grateful for any comfort that you have. So after leaving the retreat, I remember getting on, I think I got in the back of like a pickup truck, and they like trucked us out, and they took us to a ferry where I got on a boat on a ferry and went to an island to go be by myself for another week and just do diving and eat amazing Thai food. And I remember everything felt like Christmas morning. Everything felt so intense. So like, even, it sounds strange, but like, because I hadn't seen my face in 10 days or 12 days, right? Because there's no mirrors, of course.
Wow.
And I just remember the first time, like, I went into the bathroom at the hotel and I looked at my face and I thought, whoa, like my eyes are very blue. Like I had forgot that they're very blue. I don't know. It was just something that stood out to me. And having just conversations with people on the ferry about life, just everything felt so good. And then getting to eat at a restaurant and speak to people and smile, everything just felt so good. And sleep in a nice like hotel bed. So I think when you get used to not having a lot, when you have anything, it's amazing. Whereas it can maybe be dangerous if you get used to the comforts. You know, I haven't myself flown in first class. Okay. I always fly in economy, but everyone says, don't do it. Don't do
Really?
it. Because once you've flown in first class, you know, I'm sure it's a joke kind of, but you know what it is, you know, all the flights back to Canada, like, and I'm a small person, but like, you know, being there scrunched in, eating, you know, airplane food, and you walk past the people as they're drinking their champagne and you think, no, I know what that is and now I can't have it, and it becomes harder. So I don't know. Do you think that could be a lesson, Michael? Does that sound like could be a lesson?
Yeah, I mean, it's very relatable for me. After the first retreat I went on, I was waiting for my train to go home, and I was just sitting on the floor, like just cross-legged on the ground at the train station, like waiting for it to come. And I was just like looking around, like so happy. I felt so grateful just to be alive, to feel like the fresh air, listen to the conversations. I would, you know, making small talk with a few people also waiting there, and I was really, really enjoying like every interaction I had. Yeah, it was an amazing thing. So I think gratitude is a big takeaway from depriving yourself. It's like not allowing yourself to have something good, depriving yourself of these things we take for granted. And I would say on a slightly different note, I also noticed how a lot of the content I was consuming, like on YouTube and that kind of stuff, was not great for me. A lot of like things related to drama and arguments and stuff like that, which is kind of like mindlessly entertaining. But after the retreat, I kind of just felt, why did I listen to this? Like, this is so like, I don't know, toxic. It's so negative. Like, it's not good for my brain. So it also allowed me to realize some things like that and make some changes in that direction too. So that That was kind of a nice realization.
Yeah, absolutely. You become very aware of the state of your own mind and perhaps what you're putting into it. I've always been like very protective of, so to speak, of what I consume. Like I'm not a social media person. I don't look at social media. I don't really have it, only for the business. But it's something that I think is pretty important to be aware of, that all of the content that you are consuming on YouTube, on podcast, on anything is being created, a lot of it, to capture your attention, to absorb your attention.
Yeah.
And if you give that attention, it has consequences. I mean, some content is brilliant and it's wonderful and it's enriching. But some content is just there, you know, like you're saying, drama or violence. It's just there because humans like that, you know. So humans can enjoy that, but in the end, it's actually not good. I remember loving to watch scary movies when I was little, and I would not watch those movies anymore because I can't handle it. Like I it really, really scares me. But yeah, it's important to be aware of what we're, you know, putting into our minds, what we're consuming.
For sure, yeah. So leading on from that, you kind of mentioned about 10 minutes ago about how that kind of inspired you to get more into stories, listening to all those people recount their experience up there, maybe on stage. So what do you think are some of the benefits of learning with stories?
Well, so after I got back from the meditation retreat, as I had kind of said before, it was like a time in my life where, you know, I had lost someone important to me. I'd lost my dad. I was living far away from home. I'm sure that you can relate to that now, that feeling of a bit homesickness. And at this time, I remember working a lot. So as, you know, having an English school and also being a teacher, you know what it's like to be a teacher, Michael. It's a lot of work. You do a lot of, you know, preparation of classes, and you just put a lot into it. So I remember at that time being alone in my flat, and as I would prepare my lessons, I would listen to a podcast called The Moth, and these are true stories. It's an American podcast, and people perform, well, they tell their true stories live on a stage. And I would listen to these stories, and it just made me feel closer to home. I can't explain it. It's the same feeling when you're listening to someone else's story, you just feel connected. So I loved hearing, you know, a North American accent and hearing these things that happened, these cultural references. And then at that time, so I would be listening to these podcasts, preparing my classes, and that's when I read this study. So that came out in 2016. It was published in Nature, and they put people listening to the Moth podcast into an MRI, and like I said before, they thought that only a small part of their brain would be active, the part of the brain that's responsible for processing language. But in fact, their whole brain was lit up like a Christmas tree, which was unexpected. And there's a lot of reasons for this. But basically, when we're listening to a story, we are mirroring what that person is experiencing. So if in the story they are afraid or stressed out, then our brain is mirroring that feeling, and we can actually produce adrenaline and feel stressed just listening. Or if that person is talking about something wonderful and good, then we could release dopamine, which is the feel-good neurotransmitter. And also, when our brains are active, when the neurons are active, it can indicate, and in this case it does indicate, that we are learning things more. So if I hear the word get in a truck, so I hear the phrasal verb, she got in the truck after the meditation retreat, and you feel excitement for the person telling the story, you feel a little bit of dopamine, a little bit of that feel-good neurotransmitter, then you are more likely to remember that word. You're more likely to remember get in the truck, because it kind of, the way I've heard it described is that your brain leaves like a Post-it note. Do you know what a Post-it note is? Like a sticky note on this word. Yeah, like a sticky note saying like, remember this. Like it kind of imprints somehow because there's emotions surrounding it. So anytime in my case, stories, but any content that you're consuming. So Level Up English. If you're talking about really interesting things that make people feel things, make people interested, it becomes easier to remember, basically. It becomes easier to recall the words that you hear. And that's what we all want to do. We want to learn. That becomes essential for using a language, is remembering the vocabulary.
Yeah, I'm really happy you said that, because this links really nicely to something I've experienced and something I've also been speaking about on the podcast in the past, but I didn't know about any science. I just kind of found it in my own experience. And this is that things are more memorable when they're connected with a strong emotion, right? Whether that's happiness or it could be a negative one. Like embarrassment, I think, is a good one. Like I've had many embarrassing language situations in the past, and those are the ones that stick in my head. Like I remember every word I've said when I've kind of made a mistake. So, or if I'm something's really funny, that word sticks in my head. But if it's really boring and you're falling asleep, you just don't remember any vocabulary, do you? So I think that's a really good practical tip that learners can take from this. Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, anyone who's lived abroad and has learned a different language will have this experience, or not even lived abroad, but just made a mistake with a word. You remember it. I remember being here in Barcelona and going into a restaurant, and I had lived here for years. It was like 3 years, a long time. And I asked them for a fork. I asked them for a fork, which is a very basic sentence. And the lady, she couldn't understand me, and she wasn't trying to be mean, of course. She just didn't understand me. And I will never, ever forget that word from that point forward.
Right. Yeah.
Tenedor, fork. But yeah, that's why being immersed in a language makes it much easier to remember the words, because the time that we're using the language, it is very emotional because it's actually happening to us. But when we're living not in an English-speaking country and we want to learn the language, you have to keep in mind that you need to be entertained. You need to be engaged in what you're doing. If it's boring, just like you said, you won't learn it. It's impossible.
Yeah. Yeah, I get so many questions of learners asking what's the best way to learn English, the most efficient way to learn English. And I always try to, I'm sure you would agree, I always try to emphasize that having fun is the main thing. Like, even if this way is not, technically the most efficient, if this way is more fun, I imagine that's going to be the best way, because fun is good, fun is fun. And also it's going to be more beneficial for remembering things. So why would you not want to make your learning fun? So I think there's so many reasons to do that.
Exactly. I've heard, I can't remember the name of him. I think he's a linguist or an expert in education, but he says that entertainment or fun is the gatekeeper to learning.
Okay.
So something like, the first thing is that it has to be entertaining and engaging and fun to us. And then after that, we can learn it. So it can be incredible content. It can be not incredible. It can be, let's give the example of a list of phrasal verbs. 100 phrasal verbs, 1,000 phrasal verbs. Why not? Let's go crazy. I've had students ask me, hey, Bree, can I have all of the phrasal verbs that are going to be on the B2 first exam, which is a Cambridge exam? And I was like, yes, I'm sure that there is someone out there who has created a resource that is a database of all of the phrasal verbs. But there is no way that you can learn that. The average person, I mean, I'm sure there are people that have crazy memories that work in abnormal ways. But lists of vocabulary do not work because they are not interesting. And another part of this is that there is no context.
Yeah.
So you and me, we both teach in a way where we're trying to put vocabulary in context. So it's not like this conversation, we're talking about meditation and retreat and just giving a list of words. We're putting everything into the context of a story, of a conversation, so that people can remember it. And that is, in fact, a very good, if you are thinking about memorization, there are some different techniques that you can use, and none of them are get a list of 100 phrasal verbs and memorize them. All of them have to do with building context around what we're learning.
Yeah. I mean, I can definitely I can definitely say that's true for my own experience as well, because I spent the first 4 years or so of my Japanese learning experience doing that, kind of just writing out words from word lists. And I kind of enjoyed it because I was so passionate about learning this, strange new language for me. And honestly, I did get fairly good at remembering these words. Like if you gave me a flashcard, what's this word? I could tell you quite easily. But then when it comes to actually using it and going into a conversation or even writing, I was just clueless. Like I would know the words, but I wouldn't know how to use them because, as you said, there was no context. So even if you are a bit crazy like me and you do enjoy like word lists, it probably won't be that useful. I think that's really important to emphasize.
Yeah, I did the same. Learning verbs in Spanish, I would memorize the past tense verbs. I would have these lists and I would memorize them or try to memorize them. I even got an application on my phone, which was great. It was like gamified and you would go through and click on them and it'd give you a little like ding. And I was like, yes, I got it right.
Yeah.
But then I couldn't use it. I couldn't use the words. And in fact, the way that I ended up learning how to use the past tense in Spanish was creating a story for myself. So I told myself a story about when I moved to Spain. So I said, or when I moved to Barcelona, I was living in a flat with some roommates. And one day I went to the market. I don't remember the story now because I don't need it anymore. But I created myself like a very short, true story. And then whenever I needed to use the past tense, I would just retell myself the story. And then I was like, okay, yeah. So I use that tense when I'm talking about something that was happening for an extended period of time. And that was a way that I was able to use it. It was like a little technique that I used that then I could always have as a resource in my brain, not on my phone or in a list, in order to remember. And I really recommend for my students that they use these techniques. And there's a few different ones, but yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Amazing. Yeah. I think part of that is also making it about your own life experience, which is really nice. If making it real and actually useful for you, not just talking about some situation that you'll never be in, which is a nice bonus too.
Yeah,
well,
definitely.
I want to be respectful of your time, so maybe we can end up in a minute. But maybe just to kind of bring it all back together and close off, I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit, but I feel like you might have something to say on this. If people are interested in getting into mindfulness or meditation in any way, even a little bit, where do you think they could start? What do you think they could do just to take one little step today to be more present in their life?
That's a really good question. And that is something I remember thinking back to that course in mindfulness that I took before the retreat. That is where they begin, right? So when you think about mindfulness, it's about putting a wedge, putting a little space in between yourself and the world, a little space between the time that something happens and you react to it. So for me, a very easy place to start is with your next meal. So hopefully, if you have time today, when you're eating your breakfast or your lunch or your dinner or even a snack, instead of looking at your phone, instead of working, instead of doing anything else, even speaking to other people, try to be extremely focused on your meal. So sitting down, being comfortable, looking at your food, looking at the color, looking at the texture, feeling the texture, putting it in your mouth, chewing, really thinking about every single sensation, because eating really does cover kind of all of the senses. We have the sight, the smell, the taste, even the sound perhaps of the way you're chewing, or, you know, if it's salad, it's crunchy. You hate that?
I cannot deal with sounds. That's why this is such a hard one for me.
Really?
The eating sounds, no way.
But okay, so sorry, I don't want, you can cut this out, but there are people and I don't know if it's considered like a syndrome or an anomaly, but who cannot handle hearing the eating sound of other people.
It's me, yeah, for sure. It's me. Like, I have to eat with headphones on if I'm with other people. It's really extreme, yeah.
Wow.
Sorry to interrupt you, but...
No, it's really interesting. I mean, so I think you have siblings? Do you have brothers or sisters?
One younger brother, yeah.
One younger brother. I don't know. So me, I'm the youngest of three sisters. And my sisters, because I think it bothers everyone hearing other people eat. Maybe not as much as you, not as extreme. But I remember when my parents would be like looking away for a second, my oldest sister, she would like take her sorry, this is probably very gross to you, but she would take like her mashed potatoes and she would like really make noises with it. And I would be like, Mom, because it was just so gross. Okay, forget the sound. Maybe sound, but not maybe, but even like imagine like a piece of, I don't know, your fork going, okay, just forget the sound. Focus more on the taste, the smell, the sight. This is a very easy, I think, enjoyable thing to do mindfully. And it's actually quite surprising how difficult it is to do it. Because you want to think about other things. I mean, a lot of people eat while they're working or eat while they're listening to a podcast. Which is nice, but if you want to find a way to be mindful and to be very present, then focusing on what is actually happening right now in this moment is the way to do it.
Yeah, that's really good. There's also a great book called Mindful Eating by Thich Nhat Hanh, which is on this topic as well, which is really nice.
Okay.
But yeah, I suppose if you are really crazy like me, and this is a bit of a challenge, then it could be, I guess, replacing any activity or removing the distraction from any activity. Like if you go for a walk with a podcast, maybe try without the podcast or whatever that would be for you, right? If you like cooking with no distractions as well, mindful cooking maybe.
Mindful cooking. I even heard someone say brush your teeth. It's like a very short thing, but instead of like brushing your teeth and thinking about the next day, just brush your teeth. Just like don't think about anything.
Yeah, and I'm sure your teeth will be healthier for that too, with more
instead of like brushing off your exactly. Yeah. Anyways,
well, I want to be mindful of your time, pun intended. But before we go, would you like to tell people more about your podcast and also anywhere else people can find out more about you?
Yeah, absolutely. So the podcast is called Into the Story, and you can find us wherever you listen to podcasts. And we release stories in seasons. So we will be starting the 5th season on the 2nd of January, 2024. And you will be able to listen to a story that Michael tells. So we'll have to leave a link for that in your show notes if you don't mind. It's going to be a wonderful story. I think they're going to enjoy. And yeah, that's the best place to listen to the podcast. We're also on Instagram and YouTube. But yeah, we're a podcast, so follow us wherever you listen to podcasts.
Yeah, wherever you listen to Level Up English, you can also just search for your podcast, right? So that's a good way. Exactly. And all the links will be in the show notes on your app, so you can find it down there for easy, clickable access. But yeah, thank you so much for coming. I really enjoyed the chat. It was really amazing. I feel calmer after talking with you, which is nice. So thank you for your time.
Yeah, it was wonderful. Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed, and it's nice to speak about this with someone else who is interested in these things, mindfulness and all of these things, walking. I think we have quite a bit in common.
Yeah, we'll have to do it again. Maybe dive deeper into it one day.
Absolutely. All right. I'll have I guess it's evening there, so have a nice evening and we'll chat soon.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.
You have been listening to the Level Up English podcast. If you would like to leave a question to be answered on a future episode, then please go to levelupenglish.school/podcast. That's levelupenglish.school/podcast. And I'll answer your question on a future episode. Thanks for listening.